If you're joining us today as part of the Green Dolphin Science community, welcome back to a new deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us for another exploration into the fascinating world of science.
And today, we're heading somewhere really special, visually at least, the Galápagos Marine Reserve.
Yeah, a place most people picture as, almost untouched.
Seen.
A true natural laboratory.
Exactly. But the material we dove into for this deep dive, it's a recent comprehensive review looking at chemical contaminants, and, well, it paints a much more complicated picture.
It really does. So our mission today is to understand this chemical landscape. We want to dig into what kinds of chemical pollution are actually showing up there.
What's driving it? Because it's not always just local stuff, which is maybe surprising.
Right. And how is it impacting that incredibly unique wildlife? Plus, the challenges. How do you even monitor this stuff in such a remote place? And what are the potential solutions?
And I think the central question, the real paradox here is how? How can a place like the Galapagos, so remote, so protected, this famous natural laboratory, be facing significant chemical pollution? It really makes you think.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What makes the Galapagos so unique? Geographically, I mean.
Well, picture this volcanic archipelago way out in the eastern Pacific, about 970 kilometers off Ecuador's coast.
Right, on the equator.
Exactly. And that's key. It's this meeting point for major ocean currents. You've got the Humboldt, the Panama, the Cromwell, the South Equatorial. They all converge there.
Creating this incredibly dynamic environment.
Totally. And that's why it's such a biodiversity hotspot. The marine reserve is huge. 133,000 square kilometers.
Wow.
And it's home to something like 9,000 known species. Get this, about 20% of the marine species are endemic, found nowhere else.
The natural laboratory that inspired Darwin.
That's the one. It's got protections too, national park since '59, UNESCO site. They even added the Hermandad Marine Reserve in 2022. Massive area.
So you'd think, okay, isolated, protected, should be safe from modern problems, right?
You would think. But the review points out that, actually, despite all that, the Galapagos is kind of on the front lines of the Anthropocene.
Really? How so?
It's feeling the effects of the great acceleration, that huge boom in human activity and impact that kicked off mid-20th century.
Okay, so what kind of pressures are we talking about?
Well, there's a whole list piling up. Climate change is a big one. Messing with El Niño and La Niña cycles, stressing everything out.
Right.
But then there are more direct local things, too. The population's growing, lots of migration from the mainland, tourism is booming.
Urbanization.
Yep, urbanization, more intensive agriculture, habitat destruction, invasive species getting in.
Unsustainable fishing, too, I imagine.
That, and even illegal trafficking. It's a lot of cumulative pressure.
And chemical pollution is just another layer on top of all that.
That's what this review highlights, an additional stressor. There are increasing reports, finding things like oil, plastics, pesticides, POPs, heavy metals. They're widespread, though maybe intermittently, especially in coastal zones.
Okay, so let's get into the why. Why are these chemicals showing up there? It sounds like it's more than just local dumping.
Oh, much more. It's this complex mix. You've got global reach, regional conditions, and that growing local human footprint all playing a part.
So that unique location, the equator, the currents, they don't just foster life, they move pollution too.
Exactly. Think about the climate there. It's intense. High UV radiation, high air temperatures, especially in the warm, wet season from January to May.
Right.
That kind of environment can actually speed up chemical reactions, like photodegradation, sunlight breaking chemicals down, or hydrolysis, where water breaks them down, volatilization, turning into gas.
So the Galapagos weather itself can change the chemicals, make them move differently.
Precisely. Warm, humid conditions. Good for biodegradation, microbes munching on pesticides in the soil, for instance.
But the cool, dry season
might slow that down. And the weather patterns themselves matter hugely. Heavy rain in the wet season or hotter El Niño events. That can wash more stuff off the land into the water.
Like pesticides from farms.
Pesticides, heavy metals from soils, yeah. Surface runoff. It also increases atmospheric deposition chemicals falling out of the air.
And wind, does that play a role?
Definitely. Especially in the cool, dry season. It helps transport volatile compounds long distances through the air, and it can carry pesticide spray drift from agricultural areas.
And climate change might make this worse.
That's the prediction. Warmer temperatures globally could make some chemicals more mobile, travel further through the atmosphere. It changes how they distribute between air, water, sediment, life.
Okay, so the atmosphere is one pathway. What about the ocean itself, the currents?
Hugely important. The currents, the volcanic nature of the islands, they dictate the ocean's physics and chemistry, temperature, salinity, pH, and these vary a lot across the reserve, spatially and over time.
And that affects the contaminants.
Absolutely. It changes how well they dissolve, where they end up, water, sediment, organisms. That's called partitioning, and it affects how they react. The source mentions, for example, some nitrogen compounds break down faster in sunlight when salinity is higher. But honestly, our understanding of these specific processes in the Galapagos is still pretty limited.
You mentioned volcanic nature. These are active volcanic islands. Does that add chemicals too?
It certainly predisposes the area to certain heavy metals, especially mercury. Eruptions release it, and just the normal weathering of volcanic rock releases it too.
Like the Fernandina eruption recently.
Yeah, or Wolf Volcano in 2022. But the tricky part is figuring out how much of the total heavy metal load comes from this natural volcanic activity versus other sources. We don't really know that balance yet.
So, okay, the local environment shapes things, but where are these chemicals originating if it's not all local?
That's where the big transport systems come in, atmosphere and ocean currents acting like highways. They move airborne and waterborne stuff like POPs, heavy metals, plastics regionally and globally.
So stuff from the mainland or even further?
Yes. The Humboldt Current is a major player, especially in the cool, dry season. Strong swells, winds. They can bring plastic waste from the continent to Galapagos shores really fast, maybe within just 2 months, the review suggests.
Wow, that's quick.
And things like upwelling, bringing deeper water to the surface, might also introduce mercury, which again makes it hard to separate from the volcanic mercury.
And the source mentioned animals moving contaminants too. Biotic transport.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? Migratory species, sharks, whales, seabirds traveling huge distances, they can carry contaminants in their bodies.
Like PCBs and sperm whales passing through.
Exactly. That was the example given.
Yeah.
So the very migrations that make the Galapagos ecosystem so incredible are also potentially a pathway for pollution transport. Shows how connected everything is.
It really does. And these environmental factors, they don't just move chemicals, they affect how toxic they are, right?
Critically. Many Galapagos organisms are already living near their physiological limits because the environment is so dynamic anyway.
So add pollution on top.
And it gets worse. High temperatures, for instance, can make some chemicals more reactive, maybe create more toxic byproducts. It can also increase how much an organism absorbs.
So a warmer ocean could make them more vulnerable to the same amount of pollution.
Potentially, yes. It creates these synergistic multi-stressor situations where heat plus pollution is worse than either one alone. The source mentions studies elsewhere, higher temp and salinity, making a pesticide more toxic to crabs, lower pH, making copper more toxic to mussels.
But not much specific data for Galapagos species on that yet.
Limited, unfortunately, but the principle is definitely a concern there.
Okay, so beyond the big environmental drivers, there's the human footprint, locally and globally.
Right, the great acceleration backdrop. More people, more industry, more global trade means more chemicals released everywhere. Globally, the estimate is staggering 220 billion tons discharged each year.
And in the Galapagos itself, growing population, tourism.
Exactly. Intensifying local pressures. Urbanization, agriculture expanding.
I saw that stat about solid waste, up 52% in under 10 years.
Yeah, a huge jump. From about 19 tons a day to almost 29 tons a day between 2010 and 2019. And critically, without major investment in waste management, landfills, recycling, treatment.
So leakage risk.
Big time. Plastic waste, other chemicals just getting out to the environment. And wastewater is another big one. Sewage treatment is inadequate in many places.
Meaning household chemicals, microplastics.
Going straight into coastal waters near towns. Then there's shipping. It's ramped up massively to bring in essentials.
Like diesel for power.
All that ship traffic increases the risk of oil spills just during normal operations, loading, unloading.
And ships can bring invasive species too, right?
They do, like that spaghetti bryozoan example. And sometimes controlling those invasives requires more chemicals. It's a complex web.
And those foreign fishing fleets nearby.
Operating right on the edge of the reserve, they're a mobile source of pollution, discard of fishing gear, plastics, other waste. It all adds up.
So it's this convergence, local human activity ramping up, global connections bringing stuff in, all interacting with the unique Galapagos environment makes it really susceptible.
Okay, let's dive into some of the specific chemicals the review looked at and what they're actually doing to the wildlife. Oil pollution first. The Jessica spill in 2001 is the big one everyone remembers.
Right, the tanker spill. How bad was it, really?
Well, it was the biggest in the Galapagos, about 600 tons of diesel, 300 of bunker fuel. Globally, maybe moderate. Luckily, the weather helped. Wind and currents dispersed a lot of it, so it wasn't heavy oiling everywhere.
But some islands did get hit.
Oh yeah, Fernandina, Isabella saw moderate oiling. Sediment levels dropped fairly quickly afterwards, though.
And the animals? How do they fare?
Significant impacts for some. The review said it was comparable to the stress from a really bad El Nino. Marine iguanas were hit hardest.
The ones that are unique to the islands.
Exactly. Over 140 found oiled. Their stress hormone levels were sky high, like during the '98 El Nino that killed so many. On one island, Santa Fe, 62% of the local iguana population died.
Wow. Why were they so affected?
The hypothesis is they ingested oiled algae. It might have messed up the bacteria in their gut needed for digestion, so even if food was there, they couldn't process it properly, compromised their health, growth.
What about sea lions? They're iconic there too.
They saw effects like conjunctivitis, chemical burns on skin and eyes on the oiled islands.
Yeah.
But interestingly, unlike El Nino years where their food vanishes, the oil spill didn't cause a major population drop.
Because their fish prey weren't as affected.
Seems likely. Fish and invertebrates didn't show big abundance changes. Maybe they could move away, or their habitats weren't totally ruined. Even artisanal fisheries weren't significantly impacted overall.
Very species-specific impacts.
Totally depended on how they interacted with the oil. Seabirds were vulnerable, of course, foraging on the surface. Brown pelicans, some boobies, albatross were found oiled.
But the review made a point about chronic pollution, not just big spills like the Jessica.
Yes, and this is crucial. While the Jessica was bad, the day-to-day smaller discharges from all the ship traffic, fishing boats, ferries, cruise ships might actually be a more significant chronic source over the long term.
Is there evidence for that?
Yeah. After the Jessica spill, researchers found hydrocarbon contamination on beaches that weren't in the spill's path. And the chemical fingerprint didn't match the Jessica oil.
Meaning it came from somewhere else? Local sources.
Exactly. Suggests there's this background level of oil pollution from regular local inputs happening all the time.
Okay, let's move to plastics. Seems like you can't escape plastic pollution anywhere now.
It really is everywhere. Global production is enormous, over 390 million tons a year, and it leaks into the environment and just sticks around. Common types are polyethylene, polypropylene.
And the threat is twofold, right?
Yeah.
Physical and chemical.
Yeah, physical entanglement is obvious and awful, but then there are the chemical additives. Those can leach out and cause problems.
Where's the plastic in the Galápagos coming from?
The big stuff, macroplastics. Mostly from international fishing fleets operating near the reserve and waste washing over from the continent.
Carried by the Humboldt Current.
Primarily, yeah. It tends to dump debris on the eastern coastlines. Then you have microplastics, pieces under 5 millimeters. They're everywhere, too.
Is their distribution the same?
Not quite. The slightly bigger microplastics, 1 to 5 millimeter, are still influenced by the Humboldt, accumulating on those eastern beaches. But local currents, wind, even the shape of the beach matter, too. Tortuga Bay on Santa Cruz, a key turtle nesting site, had really high levels, including tiny plastic pellets used in manufacturing, weirdly far from any source.
What about the really, really small pieces, under a millimeter?
Those seem less tied to the big currents. Their distribution looks more site-specific. High concentrations near towns, near wastewater outflows, suggest local inputs are driving those.
And they can move between islands.
Yeah, there's evidence for that. Particles found in Isabella might have come from other islands. It really highlights the need to manage local sources, like improving wastewater treatment.
And the plastic already there breaks down further.
Yes, the strong UV light accelerates fragmentation. So larger items break down into secondary microplastics right there in the environment.
How is all this plastic affecting the wildlife?
Citizen science has been huge here. Over 197 records of interactions, marine reptiles, seabirds, mammals, lots of fish species, including sharks and rays.
Entanglement is a big one for sea lions historically.
Yes, mainly linked to fishing debris, hundreds of incidents recorded over the years, and a formal risk assessment flagged 30 species as high risk for severe injury or death from plastic. Lots of overlap with the citizen science reports. Fish, reptiles, seabirds, mammals.
And invertebrates, too. You mentioned they were surprising.
Yeah, data is scarcer for them, but one study found 7 invertebrate species ingesting microplastics. Giant barnacles and slate pencil urchins were particularly contaminated.
Doesn't matter how they feed.
Definitely. Filter feeders mostly got fibers. Grazers and scavengers got fragments. So you really need to consider feeding strategy and their place in the food web to predict risk.
What about the chemical risk? The leaching additives, is there data on that for Galapagos species?
Not specifically, no. That's a big gap. The worry is chemicals leaching out and causing chronic issues like endocrine disruption, messing with hormones.
But levels of related chemicals like PCBs are low in sea lions now.
Currently, yes, relatively low concentrations of things like PCBs and PBDEs found in sea lions and their prey, but these compounds have been found at high levels in plastic debris elsewhere. So investigating if additives are leaching out in the GMR and what risk they pose is really important.
Okay, let's switch to pesticides and persistent organic pollutants, POPs. These feel more land-based?
They often are initially. It's a diverse group. POPs are nasty because they're stable, they don't break down easily, they build up and organisms bioaccumulate, and they travel long distances.
Many are banned, right, but not all.
Right. Many are banned globally by the Stockholm Convention, but some, including pesticides that fall into this category, are still allowed in mainland Ecuador. Things like chlorpyrifos, heptachlor, even DDT for certain uses historically. The DDT found in Galápagos now is probably leftover from past efforts to control invasive rats.
So is farming on the islands a major local source now?
It seems to be a key one, especially on Santa Cruz, where most people live and farm. Even though they import most food, local farming is significant. And the review found 2/3 of farmers use pesticides regularly. Residues are turning up in the soil.
And controlling invasive species uses chemicals too.
Yes, with over 1,400 non-native species, chemical control, including things like glyphosate, is often seen as necessary. Most farmers view invasives as a major threat. It creates this difficult trade-off, food security, livelihoods, invasive control versus the environmental cost of the chemicals.
And lack of regulation makes it riskier.
Absolutely. Reliance is growing, but monitoring and control are limited. So you get incorrect application, spills, improper disposal, all increasing the chance of these chemicals getting into the environment.
Are they making it into the marine reserve? The water?
Yes. Pesticide residues have been found in coastal waters near towns like Puerto Ayora and Villamil. The first big regional study detected 16 different pesticides.
Any at concerning levels?
Worryingly, yes. Many exceeded levels that are used internationally as indicators of potential toxicity. High-risk ones included aldrin, DDT, heptachlor, chlorpyrifos. DDT and heptachlor were detected really frequently in the water samples.
And the impact on wildlife, is it direct toxicity or something else?
The biggest concern here is biomagnification. These chemicals build up in individual animals, and then concentrations get magnified massively as you go up the food chain.
Putting top predators like sea lions at most risk.
Exactly. Studies have shown DDT transferring up the food chain from fish prey to sea lions and biomagnifying significantly.
Did they find actual health effects in the sea lions?
One study looked at pups and found only about 1% had levels exceeding a threshold for anti-androgenic effects messing with male hormones. But adults, having accumulated chemicals for longer, are expected to have higher levels, more research needed there. And crucially, these pesticides almost never show up alone. They're usually in mixtures.
Ah, the synergistic effects problem again.
Exactly. The combined effect can be additive, or worse, synergistic, where the mixture is way more toxic than you'd expect from just adding up the individual chemical effects. This has been shown in fish elsewhere, so it's a real worry for Galapagos fish, too.
So we need to think about the whole cocktail of chemicals.
Definitely. Other POPs, like PCBs and PBDEs, are also present in sea lions and prey, though usually at lower levels than DDT currently.
Okay, last category. Heavy metals. These can be natural or human-caused, right?
Correct. And the Galapagos has a natural source because it's an active volcanic archipelago. Eruptions and rock weathering release metals like mercury.
But figuring out how much is natural versus human is tricky.
Very tricky. Local human sources like towns and harbors are thought to be minor, but agriculture is emerging as a local source again.
From fertilizers and pesticides.
Seems so. Elevated cadmium, zinc, copper found in farm soils, sometimes above European safety thresholds. Leaching from that soil into water is a concern.
And then there's transport from far away.
Yes, big time. Industrial waste, power plants, mining on the continent, and globally release heavy metals. Most mercury in the global oceans actually comes from atmospheric deposition, from human activities elsewhere.
Wow, 90%.
Around that, yeah. And ocean currents, like the Humboldt upwelling, also bring metals like mercury in. The fact that tuna caught in the GMR have similar mercury levels to tuna off mainland Ecuador supports this idea of transport playing a big role.
What are the impacts of heavy metals on Galapagos wildlife?
Again, top predators are at risk due to biomagnification, potential pinnipeds, sharks, tuna, seabirds. High mercury is particularly bad, toxic to kidneys. Immune system, nervous system can cause mutations.
And the review found worrying levels in sea lion pups.
Yes, Galapagos sea lion and fur seal pups had mercury levels exceeding thresholds known to affect lymphocyte function. That suggests their immune systems could be compromised.
And higher levels than sea lions elsewhere.
Significantly higher, yeah. 3 to 10 times higher than California sea lions in non-volcanic areas. Suggests a combination of the natural background and other inputs. Sharks also show varying levels, often higher in larger, older individuals.
What about fish people eat, like tuna?
High mercury found in tuna, wahoo, some other predatory fish. In some cases, mussel concentrations actually exceeded limits set by the EU and USA for safe marketing. That's a potential human health issue.
But some seabirds had low levels. Penguins, cormorants.
Interestingly, yes. Mercury was below detection limits in feathers for some species. Maybe their diet exposes them less. We need more data on the base of the food web to really understand the full biomagnification picture.
And other metals besides mercury. Cadmium.
Yes, metals like cadmium, lead, chromium also accumulate, especially in bottom-dwelling fish. High cadmium was found in many species, again raising human toxicity concerns because levels exceeded international guidelines. So research is definitely needed on species tolerance, but also on the risk to people eating these fish.
Okay, so we've got this complex web of chemicals from near and far impacting unique wildlife. What makes monitoring this so incredibly difficult in the Galapagos?
Well, the first massive hurdle is just the remoteness. It's expensive and logistically complicated to get there, let alone set up systematic long-term monitoring across that huge marine reserve.
Covering water, sediment, air, animals.
Exactly, and doing it consistently over time. Plus, you've got extreme weather sometimes, rugged terrain that's hard to access. It's just physically challenging.
And the complexity of the pollution itself. Mixtures from different sources.
Makes it really hard to untangle. Which chemical is doing what? Where did it come from? How do they interact? Those synergistic effects are tough to assess.
And the labs on the islands aren't equipped for this kind of analysis.
Generally not for the really sophisticated stuff, no. You need advanced techniques like mass spectrometry. So samples usually have to be shipped off island.
Which risks degrading the sample, costs money, takes time.
All of the above. Plus, there's a shortage of people on the islands with the specialized training in analytical chemistry and risk assessment needed to run these programs locally.
And the protected status, while vital, adds another layer.
It does. Getting research permissions, ethical considerations for sampling animals, especially protected ones, it understandably limits what can be done comprehensively, particularly for toxicity studies.
So the result is patchy data, snapshots.
Pretty much. Lots of valuable work done by visiting scientists, but often short-term campaigns. What's needed is a more comprehensive, systematic program involving the local authorities, getting the right permissions set up for the long haul.
The review suggested using rapid assessment tools as part of the solution.
Yeah, these are seen as a practical way forward for remote places. Tools that are relatively quick, simple, robust, and cheaper than full lab analysis. Things like passive samplers, devices you leave in the water that soak up contaminants over time, giving you an integrated measure, or electrochemical biosensors that could potentially detect things like pesticides right there on the spot.
Handheld devices, too.
Maybe even things like handheld infrared spectrometers for identifying plastic types, potentially usable by trained citizen scientists doing beach cleanups.
What about using biological indicators, monitoring animal responses?
That's another approach. Looking for known biological responses, like specific enzyme levels that indicate exposure to certain chemicals, or physical signs like imposex in snails caused by TBT pollution, these are used globally.
But challenging in the Galapagos with protected species.
Right. Ongoing biomonitoring using animals is limited by ethics and protection status, which leads to the idea of focusing on specific sentinel species.
Ones that are easier to work with and tell you something about the broader environment.
Exactly. Species that are abundant, widespread, relatively easy to sample, and accumulate pollutants or show clear responses. Sea lions are proposed, but they're large vertebrates, logistically tough.
So maybe invertebrates.
That's a key suggestion. Things like giant barnacles or slate pencil urchins. Barnacles filter huge amounts of water and are used globally to monitor metals and microplastics. Urchins are ecologically important and known to be sensitive to pollutants like pesticides.
But needs more research for Galapagos species specifically.
Definitely. Need to understand their specific responses, develop minimally invasive sampling methods if possible, and validate them in the field. But they look promising.
So the overall recommendation is an integrated approach, mixing these different tools.
Yes, like a hierarchy. Start with broad data like citizen science on beach plastic. Use regional sentinels like barnacles or urchins. Deploy rapid assessment tools. Conduct targeted sampling campaigns in specific areas. Focus on known hotspots. Build up the picture piece by piece.
And targeting hotspots like harbors for interventions makes sense.
Absolutely. The review clearly points to them as areas where pollutant inputs are concentrated. That's where management efforts could have the biggest impact.
And specific recommendations for each pollutant type.
Yeah, for plastics, get a standardized monitoring program going, focus interventions on harbors, improve wastewater treatment. For pesticides, urgently research how they're getting in, where they go, what they're doing, especially up the food chain, and do proper risk assessments. For heavy metals, figure out that volcanic versus human source contribution, understand the transport pathways better, research species tolerance, especially lower down the food chain, and really evaluate the human health risk from eating contaminated fish.
Wow. This has been incredibly illuminating. It paints such a different picture of the Galapagos than the pristine postcard image.
It really does. I think the key takeaway is just how complex it is, and maybe sobering, that even this remote, highly protected place isn't shielded from chemical pollution.
It's this mix of global transport, regional factors, and local human pressures.
Exactly. The currents bring things in, the unique environment affects how chemicals behave, and then local activities, population, tourism, farming, waste add to the load. It's a confluence of factors.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is and how far human impacts reach.
Absolutely. Which leads to that final thought, maybe for you, our listener, to ponder. If even the Galapagos, this icon of conservation, is facing these chemical pressures, what does that imply about the state of the rest of our planet's oceans and ecosystems, especially those with fewer protections?
And maybe, what responsibility do we all share, no matter where we live, in tackling the sources of this pollution and striving for a healthier planet overall?